There's 7 things that your home insurance doesn't cover that you may not be aware of. I found this in an article from AARP, and it was actually pretty impressive, fairly accurate. The first piece that you have to be aware of is insurance doesn't typically cover renovations or modifications to your home. Unless you've notified them, they're not going to be aware of anything additionally that needs to be covered. For example, if you add a wheelchair ramp to your house, if you change a bathroom or add a bathroom, if you upgrade the granite, if you upgrade the flooring, all of the things that could increase the value of your home needs to be insured properly. What insurance companies do is they create what's called an RCE. It's a replacement cost estimate. And it's based on the material of your home, the average cost to get the material, the average cost for someone to install it. That's what builds the replacement value of what insurance costs to insure the home. When you do those additions, make sure you let your agent know that those renovations have been done. Number 2 is floods and earthquakes. Those are separate policies that you need to purchase. You should know if you're in a flood zone because 9 times out of 10 you can't even buy a house in a flood zone unless you have the insurance, at least if you're going to get a mortgage on it. If you're near a flood zone or if your location starts to see a lot of water commonly, you may want to buy a flood policy, or if you're near where earthquakes can happen, you may want to add that earthquake policy or purchase a separate one. I get it, it's a lot more expensive to have, but it's that or the house is a complete disaster. Part of the home policy is not priced for those scenarios. Make sure you talk to the agent to find out if that's a scenario that you need to have covered. Number 3 is a tricky gray area because it's called personal property. It's essentially the valuable items that you have. Most of them are covered only to a small amount. For example, jewelry usually has a cap of $1,500. That's most common on most policies in most states. If you have a $5,000 wedding ring, you need to add it as a scheduled item, which essentially just says, I'm scheduling it or I'm saying that I have this ring. It's $5,000. I want to insure it for the full $5,000. Once you get up into paintings or into special furs, or that ring gets into $25,000, now you may have to show proof of the value of it in order to insure it properly. But in most cases, you also have the option of adding something called a blanket coverage, which can cover multiple items up to the $1,500 or whatever the limit that the insurance company has set, but at a larger amount. So where your jewelry may max out at $2,500, now you may be able to add $50,000, but it still holds that single item limit. So be very careful when you're adding those blanket coverages. It may not be enough to insure that specific item properly. The 4th that a homeowner's policy typically doesn't cover is an employee or someone doing work at your house. If it's a friend or family and they're working, you're paying them, you're essentially having a contract or some sort of working agreement, and insurance doesn't typically pick that up. If it's a friend that's coming over that's just helping you paint and there's no money being exchanged, or you're not actually like paying them for the service, that's a different scenario. That is usually, check with your agent, but I'd say most of the time okay. But otherwise, if you're paying someone or you're paying for a service, that's a separate commercial style policy or an additional policy that you may have to cover that. It's a little bit different for most companies. It's kind of a company choice, but when you have like a live-in nanny, usually a policy, check with your agent, will add that additional coverage or have additional coverage on your home. It's a little bit different for auto because you got to add them as a driver, but as far as home insurance goes, a lot of the times having someone live with you, if the company offers that coverage, is included with it. Number 5 is mold and pest damage. There's a fine line between rodent and pest. Kind of the same thing. Let's say rodent or insects. If you have termite damage, that's something that you're supposed to prevent. That is not typically going to be covered on a home policy. If you have any mold, that's usually because there's water that's standing or condensation that's building up and the house isn't properly sealed. In those cases, having mold in the home usually leads, and I'd say 9 out of 10 times leads to denying a claim because it's not something that should have been covered in the first place. That being said, there is an additional coverage. I usually add it to all of our policies that covers what's called water backup. Just make sure that it also includes mold with it, because if it goes, water backs up, you didn't know it was behind a wall, and mold starts to form back there, that again could be denied. Sort of, it's a little bit of a fight, right? You don't want to have that argument but I'd say half the time is covered, half the time isn't. It's that gray area. But you might as well have the coverages built into it. Honestly, I don't think it's even more than a few dollars to have that additional mold added on to what's called a water backup coverage. By the way, if you are shopping for a new home or auto insurance, I'll put a link in the description below where you can get a quote with a local independent agent where one person can shop multiple companies to see if there are better fits or better coverages for your scenario. The 6th is banned dog breeds. That's a very common, and most homeowners know this. Although with younger people purchasing homes, they may not have been taught this. So just know that there are dog breeds that aren't allowed with some companies. Some companies don't care. They just love every dog. And if you have a pit bull or if you have a Rottweiler, those aren't necessarily vicious dogs, although they're considered vicious breeds. It's because what they were used for. They were fight dogs and cage dogs, and people use them to be attack dogs and defend dogs. And the thing is, they cause damage. The dogs that cause the most damage if they bite someone, even in defense, which could happen. We've had it before. There was a house fire, half of it literally almost blew up, and then their dog was on a leash outside. Construction worker wanted to pet it, got bit, right? The dog was nervous, it didn't know what to do, it no longer had a home. It was like normally a great dog, but in those scenarios, you have to be careful as an insurance company what breeds you're going to take on. Now they're starting to open that up a lot more where I'm seeing more breeds being accepted, but know that some dog breeds may not be insured on your home policy. And the 7th is exterior damage. Again, thanks AARP for putting this one together. One of the few articles that almost was 100% all the way there. Exterior damage meaning additional pieces that may not be part of your home. Yeah, exterior, if there's a hole in your siding, they're not gonna cover it if you knew that. That's just your maintenance issue that you should have taken care of. Again, there's probably going to be mold, so it's that scenario. If you have pipes that go from the road to your home, that's another piece a lot of people don't realize. There's a service line coverage that now has become popular to your older home. So if you had what I had in the past, which was a tree grew into a pipe that was supposed to exit the water to the street. It didn't because the tree branch grew into it and it dumped back into my house. Luckily, I had water backup, so that was covered, but the line or the pipe there wasn't because I had to have it dug up and repaired. So having those service line coverages or extra coverages, maybe power lines that are going to your house, those aren't normal coverages because it's more of in between where it would or wouldn't be covered. Also, a lot of people don't realize is that your street, so your sewer, is not a typical coverage on a home policy. You have essentially the main line, if this was a sidewalk or the main street, right? So we have the main line, we have a pipe that goes to your house. A lot of times the pipe going to your house, unless added, isn't a coverage, and that main line almost never, let alone can you even purchase coverage because it starts to fall on the city that you live in. So those main lines, you get into can or can't you even insure it in those scenarios. And there you have it, these 7 policy pieces that aren't typically covered on a home policy. If you're new to home insurance and you're trying to figure out what coverage you should carry, I've got our Home Insurance 101 that'll go pretty far in depth on that. I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.